Cookie Run Kingdom is a game that offers the player many different ways to strengthen their cookies. With the release of Beascuits, many players have been working to figure out how to best use these to the benefit of their team. This is Baker Berry, and today I'll be going into detail about how to get Beascuits, what they are, and the best ways to use them, so you can use them to the best ability for your team. Beascuits are a form of upgrade items that allow you to boost stats of your cookie as well as something a little bit more than just stats. Now, these were released with the release of Chapter 1 of Beast Yeast, as you can see in the name, Beascuit. Now, the Beascuits come in many shapes, forms, and sizes. As you guys can see here on the right hand side, we've got chewy Beascuits, we've got hard Beascuits, and we've got magic Beascuits all over the place. These Beascuits are used for different types of cookies. For example, the charged Beascuit, the chewy charged Beascuit can only be used by charged cookies, whereas the hard defense Beascuits can only be used for defense. You will not be able to equip these for a non-attributable cookie, and just like toppings, they give certain topping stat boosts. Now, as you guys can see here, Beascuits involve attack and HP upgrades directly linked to the Beascuit itself, but then below it, it has bonus effects or substats that you can get. Depending on the kind of Beascuit you have, you may get more or less bonus effects. For example, you have common Beascuits, which only have 1, rare Beascuits, which have 2, epic Beascuits, which have 3, and then finally legendary Beascuits, which have the full set of 4. Now, when it comes to the Beascuits, it's important to note that they have recently released elemental upgrades as well. For example, as you can see with this rare Thunder's Crispy Beascuit, it upgrades electrical damage. Now, just as well, they've released Beascuits that upgrade dark damage. Now, this is important to note because it seems clear that as the game goes on, they'll be releasing Beascuits for specific elements. We've still got fire, water, ice, and many more that have still not been touched. It's currently only dark and electric. Now, another thing about Beascuits is that if you have the lab upgrade for the extra slots, similar to the toppings, you can equip more than one Beascuit to a cookie. For early players, this may seem kind of pointless because this is more for later games. For example, if you want to use a cookie for a guild battle, but also for PvP, Creme Brulee would be a good example of that. You want to build them around different ways. You don't want to have damage resist bypass for PvE, and we'll go into more detail in that later in the video when we talk about how to best use Beascuits to your ability. Now, let's get on to the next part of the video, which is how to get Beascuits. There are multiple ways to get Beascuits, but the biggest one being through Beast Yeast story. Now, in Beast Yeast Chapter 3 is when you are able to get the light and dark Beascuits, but in Beast Yeast Chapter 1 and 2, it's only just legendary and normal Beascuits. On hard mode and below, you can get legendary, epic, rare, and not normal. When it comes to normal Beascuits, you can get epic, rare, and common. When it comes to story mode or easy mode, you can only get rare or common. Now, for newer players, I recommend trying to get the epics because the hard mode is very difficult for new players and even some veteran players who don't have certain cookies that meet the builds that are needed for these chapters. So make sure to at least get the epic Beascuits that you can. Now, the Beast Yeast story mode is not the only way to get Beascuits. One of the other primary ways to get Beascuits is through the balloon expeditions. Now, currently looking at the episode 3 at balloon expedition, we can see that it offers yeast ore, biscuit dough, bites, as well as legendary and lower Beascuits. Now, taking a look at episode 2 and 1, we can see that they don't offer legendary Beascuits, but they do still offer the yeast ore, the biscuit dough, and the bites. The bites are used to level up your Beascuits, the biscuit dough is used to re-roll the bonus effects, and the yeast ore is a rare item that you can get that will expand your storage of Beascuits. Expanding the storage of your Beascuits can be done through multiple ways. The yeast ore, but also through using your gems to expand the storage as a whole. Now, once you get your Beascuits, it's important to note the attunement beside them. Now, when you get your Beascuit, you will notice that most of them do not have highlights on them. For example, this epic spicy Beascuit, which goes for bomber cookies, only has one attunement slot that goes to the bomber, What this means is that these two that have the defense and support sign behind it do not have any effect on bomb cookies. If you were to equip this to, say, White Lily would only see this cooldown boost and the attack and HP boost. That means that these two are essentially useless without attunement. So naturally you would think it's time to attune, and you wouldn't be wrong. But it's important to note with attunement, it can go very wrong very quickly. Attunement is one of the things in this game that actually take the most gems. Upgrading a fully legendary Beascuit can take more gems than summoning a full 10 pile of cookies. Now, for example, one thing that I do is if I have a Beascuit that's only attributing one attunement slot to the type of cookie that it is going to, I will spend the first 4 attempts trying to get another one. And if I don't get another slot to go to that attunement slot, I just break down the Beascuit. Breaking down the Beascuit gives you multiple items. We'll get into more of that later. But when it comes to attunement, you want to follow a specific strategy just so you don't lose all your diamonds just from attuning, which can be very easy to do. When Beascuits first released, I and many other players spent thousands unnecessarily trying to get them to line up. All in all, we could have just played more Beascuits Beast Mode Story Mode and gotten them and tried better. Because, as you guys can see here, most of these will only have one attributed to it once you get them. But that doesn't mean that'll always be the case. It's very likely that you will come across a Beascuit that has 2, maybe even 3 of the attunement slots prepared. Those are ones that you absolutely want to invest in, because the ones are so common and are so unsure of what you will get from them. I just tend to break those down and get them out of the way. Now, if you are a newer player or you are just specifically desperate for a Beascuit for a certain cookie, you can go that extra mile just so if you have a certain cookie that you want to boost up, you can boost them up. But when it comes to getting Beascuits for your cookies in general, you want to make sure that you control that diamond usage. Now, as you guys heard earlier, and I mentioned breaking down Beascuits, that is one of the many ways to get the items that level Beascuits up. As you guys can see here, after I selected this Epic Light Beascuit, the result is bites as well as the Beascuit dough that we saw earlier. Now, what this allows you to do is reset the attunement slots so you can get specific items that you're looking for. For example, if you are going for a cookie to deal a lot of damage in the arena, you're going to want a lot of damage resist bypass and attack, because that will get past all the damage resist that you see in the arena and give that cookie that extra oomph. Whereas if you are looking for a cookie to deal damage against the Avatar of Destiny, you don't need damage resist bypass because that's strictly a PvP aspect. When it comes to PvE, you want to focus on more things just like attack and attack speed, cooldown, or damage resist, whereas bypass is literally useless. So it's important to note, depending on what your circumstances are for the Beascuit and what your use is for it, you're going to need to get specific stats. And that's where the Beascuit dough comes into play and what it can do to help you. Now, as you guys can see here, beside the Beascuit dough is the Radiant Beascuit dough. What the Radiant Beascuit dough does is it allows you to choose a specific item and then reset that. The Radiant Beascuit dough is much more rare. Now, it's important to save these for cookies that have very specific needs. The one that comes into mind the most is White Lily. For White Lily, one of her meta moves in the arena is the 2-second cooldown. And if you want to reach that 2-second cooldown, you need to have around a 40+% cooldown on White Lily. And without a full cooldown substat on the Beascuit, it's fairly impossible to get there. So the Radiant Beascuit dough is best used for these kinds of situations where you need a very specific build. Now, such as Stormbringer having full crit, White Lily having full cooldown, or things such as that nature. You do not want to use these just for a run-of-the-mill cookie or a run-of-the-mill build. Now, aside from breaking down Beascuits, there are multiple other ways to be able to get Beascuit dough as well as bites to level them up. One of the other ways to get bites is simply through missions, gifts, or the trade shop. Now, when you are building your cookie with Beascuits, it's important to know, as mentioned earlier, what your goal is. We will be taking a look at Beascuits for each class, and I'll be going over the ones you want to be looking for, the bonus effects you want, and if there's any specific cookie that would need a different kind of stat boost. So looking at defensive cookies, as you guys can see, most of these just have damage resist on them, and that is really what you're going to want to look for. Your average run-of-the-mill defensive cookie is going to want two things: cooldown and damage resist. Damage resist is really the icing on the cake for defensive cookies. Now, cooldown is useful for cookies that have skills that are very useful. Now, when I think of skills that are very useful, I think of things like Financier and Crimson Coral. These are cookies that can tank damage, so they can go by without fully focusing on damage resist, that provide very useful buffs to their team. Now, there is one exception at the moment to this Beascuit, and that is Elder Fairy. Elder Fairy's skill is maximized when you have 2 HP bonus effects on a Beascuit. So you really want to focus on getting those 2 HP Beascuits. If you can get cooldown or damage resist substats to go along with it, that's amazing. But your top priority for Elder Fairy should be the 2 HP bonus effects. So overall, for defensive cookies, you're going to want to focus on damage resist first, cooldown second, but when it comes to Elder Fairy, you want that HP more than anything. Now, looking at ranged Beascuits. Ranged Beascuits are for offensive cookies. Now, what we want to look for primarily is cookies that need attack speed and cookies that don't. As you guys can see here, Creme Brulee and Twizzly are attack speed cookies. They are directly scaled off of attack speed. Now, I really want to emphasize, make sure you look at your cookies' skills to read what they are scaling off of before you go ahead and invest in Beascuits. This is applied to every single cookie. I can't stress this enough. Look at the cookie skill before you decide to invest in the Beascuit for them. For the cookies that aren't attack speed focused, you're going to want to really go for cooldown and attack, because since ranged cookies are offensive, that's what most offensive cookies are going to be looking for, is that cooldown and attack. Now, when it comes to cookies that have attack speed, this is important to know for every offensive cookie, is that every offensive cookie will benefit from damage resist bypass. As you can see here, I have 30% bypass on Creme Brulee, because when it comes to the arena, he is extremely useful, whereas this attack speed can be used for PvE and PvP. Now, I know I mentioned earlier in the video that damage resist bypass is strictly a PvP focus, but I want to reiterate that now. Do not invest in damage resist bypass if you are only focusing that Beascuit for PvE. So when it comes to ranged cookies, your top priorities are going to be attack speed, damage resist bypass, and cooldown. In no particular order, because it depends on the cookie itself. For example, golden cheese, attack speed is not a priority for her, whereas cooldown and damage resist bypass are. Creme Brulee, attack speed and damage resist bypass are much more useful. Now, this is just another example. Make sure you take a look at your cookie skill before you apply the Beascuit. Now, looking at charged Beascuits, it's important to note that generally, charged cookies provide a similar position on the team as defensive cookies. They soak up damage, but they deal a little bit more damage than defensive cookies do. So you're going to want to focus on damage resist and cooldown normally for charged cookies. Burnt cheese, for example, stuns his opponents. So that cooldown helps him use the skill quicker, which helps him to stun more. And a note about Stormbringer is that she is also a cookie that is different than other charged cookies. If you guys like this video, make sure to hit the subscribe button so you can see any future guides that I make that will help you become a better player in Cookie Run. Now let's get back to the video. As you guys can see here, Stormbringer, I have her fully focused on crit. If you take a look at her skill, you can see that she can scale crit up to 80%, which provides damage resist, damage, and more. So there really is no reason to put damage resist into Stormbringer because crit gives that to her. Now, Stormbringer is an exception. There may be some charge cookies that are released in the future that are also scaled off of specific stats, but for the most part, when it comes to charge cookies, your focus is going to be cooldown and damage resist. Now, bomber cookies are another form of offensive cookie. As you guys can see here, across all of these, I have some form of damage resist bypass or cooldown. Bomber cookies tend to be a little bit more on the delicate side. So if you're using bomber cookies, you want to build them on a team that has some damage absorbing cookies up front. Now, White Lily is our example of a cookie that needs an extra set of Beascuit. Now, White Lily has a very defining move in the arena where she has a 2-second cooldown, so she can stun and hit very hard very quick. Due to that, you're going to want to try to have a Beascuit for her that has all cooldown, but she is really the only cookie you want to focus this heavily on cooldown for the bombers because of her stunning on that 2-second mark. Whereas if you were building with Captain Caviar, you want to focus more like any other bomber offensive cookie, damage resist bypass and attack and cooldown. Now it all depends on the build, as I've said multiple times, of the team you want. Captain Caviar can be used for the guild battle, so you're going to want to focus more on attack and cooldown, whereas he can also be used for the arena, where you're going to want more damage resist bypass and cooldown. So when it comes to ambush cookies, they're in a unique position where they're actually primarily focused on cooldown more than anything. The other cookies and skills that we've talked about before were focused on a few mixes of things, such as cooldown and attack, cooldown and damage resist, or cooldown, attack, damage resist, or including damage resist bypass. But most of these ambush cookies provide debuffs. For example, Rebel, Black Raisin, and Royal Margarine Cookie all have very strong debuffs that are applied as the top priority. Rebel lowers defense and increases damage dealt, and so does Black Raisin. And then Royal Margarine applies poison boosts and debuffs. I highly recommend checking out the Cookie Run cooldown table, which I will include in a link in the description, which will help a massive amount for any team building that you're doing, because it'll show you exactly what percent you need to reach to be able to get what kind of cooldown. So when it comes to ambush cookies, cooldown is without a doubt your top priority, and then I'd say honestly damage resist is a second, because these cookies don't need to deal that much damage because their damage dealing is through other means, debuffs and stacking poison or other things. So when you build your ambush cookie, keep that in mind. Now, up to support cookies. Support cookies play an interesting role in that they're basically healers that give a bit more buffs. For example, Mint Choco Cookie boosts attack speed massively. Cream Puff boosts crit. Snapdragon boosts a whole lot of things. Damage resist, attack, shield, the whole 9 yards. Now, generally when you're building support stats, you want to focus on two things, cooldown and attack. Now, there are a few exceptions to this rule, aka Cream Puff, and we'll go over her in a second. But usually, you're going to want to focus on that cooldown and attack stat, because a lot of the healing cookies, their healing is based off their attack stat itself. Now, Snapdragon is in a unique position where he's one of those cookies that have a cooldown target. Now, when you're boosting Snapdragon, you really want to just get to at least that 24% cooldown range, but make sure to check out that cooldown table I mentioned before to really be able to figure out what it is. Now, Cream Puff is an exception to this in the fact that she scales off crit, like Stormbringer. The more crit Cream Puff has, the more she can boost and the higher chance she has of having a great success move, which allows her to deal damage and boost the crit and massively increase the HP of the party. Now, next up is Magic Cookies. Magic Cookies are another offensive cookie that deal massive damage. Now, when it comes to magic and setting them up, it's going to be like any other offensive cookie. You're going to want to focus on cooldown, attack, and damage resist bypass. As you guys can see here, I have Blueberry with 3 damage resist bypasses because she's exclusively used in the arena. Similar to Frost Queen, where if you want to be able to build her, damage resist bypass is really useful for those one-shots. But as you guys can see here, I have damage resist on my Frost Queen, and that's because some builds need her to have some damage resist. Now, the best example for this is generally story mode, which is what I built this Beascuit for. I was using Frost Queen in the latest Beast Yeast Chapter 3, and there would be times where she could get one shot on hard mode. So I wanted to give her that damage resist, but because she's a magic cookie, she still has that heavy hit. And you want to try to get some cooldown on her so she can do those heavy hits more often. Remember, magic cookies are offensive cookies, but because they're so offensive like ranged cookies, they're very susceptible to taking damage and dying quickly without the proper protection. And last but not least is healing. Healing cookies are very similar to support cookies in that they boost off of attack and cooldown. If you have the healing cookie using its skill more often, naturally you'll be healing more. But one important thing to note is, just like support cookies, it's heavily boosted by its attack. As you guys can see here, I actually have 2 amplify buffs and 2 attacks on Frost Yeti. I have a full set of Choco toppings on Yeti that gives him that 24% that allows him to get that quicker cooldown. You guys can check out that cooldown table to see that. But because of that, I decided to focus on attack for him. And this just goes to show that depending on the build you have and what you are looking for, you really need to focus on different things. So when it comes to healing cookies, you're really going to want to focus on attack and cooldown, just like support cookies. If you guys like this video, make sure to hit the subscribe button and check out these other guides that I have to help you become a better Cookie Run player. Make sure to leave a comment below on what you liked or what you want to see in the future. Thank you guys for tuning in. Until next time.